This is Dee Medina, and you are listening to the introductory episode of Can You Sub Again? You Can Make a Difference as a Substitute Teacher. The big news this week is actually getting this idea for a podcast up and running. I've heard my own voice online before, but this podcast is definitely uncharted waters for me. The book that I spent writing on and off for 5 years, Superstar Subbing, 7 Ways to Shine as a Substitute Teacher, is finally available for purchase. And it was just last year that my wife and I talked about the book being a launch point for this podcast. As someone who has worked vocationally with students in some capacity for over 20 years as an educator and as a father of 5, it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be to get started, but here we are. I'll talk more about the purpose behind the book, podcast, and blog over time in future episodes, but instead of spending too much time on myself, I want to thank you for being here to listen to this introductory episode, which is ironically all about making classroom introductions. I'm excited about where this endeavor is going to go, the inspiration it might give, and ultimately the positive impact on students that might take place, in small part because of what is shared. Substitute teaching is a challenge unlike any other. However, like many of life's challenges, there are rewards to be gained by rising to them. And as award-winning author and playwright and former high school teacher Wayne Scott writes in the foreword to my book, I hope you discover your true role as a substitute, your rightful place among your peers, your value to your superiors, and how to find your own rewarding path relating to the students you service. And now, I hope you enjoy this week's podcast, Why Taking the Time to Introduce Yourself to Students Matters. One student recently tweeted, "This poor substitute teacher is so quiet, and he's telling us to be quiet, but nobody will, and he's just repeatedly saying, shh, OMG. It wasn't that long ago that this tweet could have been about me in my first year of subbing. I know it's not about me because Twitter wasn't invented yet, but as an archetype, I fit just fine. I remember one high school class in particular where I was definitely the poor sub that no one was listening to. Went from mild shushing to vexed shushing. There was even a period of time when I gave up trying to get their attention altogether. Classes would walk in while I sat or stood near the desk and waited for it to get just quiet enough to begin to call out names for attendance. Brian, 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 Dana, 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 and on down the list. If I was lucky enough to get most of the attendance done, then I could approach the agenda the same way. Wait for some semi-simmered silence. Okay, your teacher wants you to turn to page 93 and do questions 1 through 7. Yes, you have to write out the question and the answers. Then the semi-simmered silence rose back to cafeteria at lunch decibels, and 3 kids out of 30 opened their books to start working. I stayed at the rolling cart or the desk, examining the lesson plan and waiting for the wandering student to ask me for what Frank McCourt simply calls the pass. I can look back on these days with the well-deserved tisk-tisk and a head shake because I know what I was doing. I was letting my insecurities get the better of me. As a result, I know that I missed out on plenty of opportunities to influence and encourage kids. I could easily blame inexperience or the fact that I was subbing to supplement our income at the time and didn't really want to be a teacher. But the truth was, I didn't know how to get their attention. Not only that, I've never been Mr. Type A, command the room with your mere presence and quick wit. So if a class wasn't going to give me their attention just because I was the only adult in the room, then I just wasn't going to get it at all. This would be a discouraging memory of an era or one of life's regrets if it wasn't for teachers like Frank McCourt. I mentioned McCourt earlier. He was the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Angela's Ashes, who also spent 30 years as a teacher in New York. He wrote a sliver of prose about his time as a substitute after having had time under his belt as a full-time teacher. Substitute teachers like me, he writes, floated somewhere on the fringes of reality. I was asked daily, "And who are you today? Mrs. Katz?" "Oh." And that's what you were. Mrs. Katz or Mr. Gordon or Miss Newman. You were never yourself. You were always, oh. In the classroom, I had no authority. Assistant principals sometimes told me what to teach, but students paid no attention, and there was nothing I could do. The ones who came to class ignored me and chatted, asked for the pass, rested their heads on desks, and dozed, floated paper airplanes, studied for other subjects. Maybe this idea doesn't affect you at all, but it helps me to know that the man who wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel that was adapted into I don't know how many languages and made into a major motion picture also struggled as a substitute teacher to get students to settle down or pay attention. And it helps not only because he went through this, but because, as his book goes on to say, he got better at fostering relationships with students. And this made all the difference. So, how does the idea of an introduction, you simply introducing yourself to each class you teach, fit into all of this? Well, it almost seems silly to ask, but have you ever had a worthwhile relationship with someone you didn't meet? It's silly, I know, so I'll put it in another silly way. Do you remember meeting the people who you value in your life? Of course you remember meeting them. It's basically a prerequisite for you letting someone into your life at all, or vice versa. We talk a lot in life about first impressions, and they start with simple introductions. We teach our own children that it's polite to meet people using certain mannerisms and phrases. Hi, my name is. Shake their hand, make eye contact, say thank you, say nice to meet you, and on down the line. Even if you're never going to see that person again, if your friend or relative introduced you to a coworker or a yard worker, there would be a polite introduction. So why is it different with the class full of students? Somewhere along the lines, it seems as though someone decided that with students, we as adults don't have to offer polite introductions. We're the adults. We have the badge, we have the key, we have the pass, we have the power. Students need to come in, sit down, and be ready to work because someone decided that's what the power pyramid should look like. I tried it this way with students for quite a long time, and even if I did quote-unquote get through my days, I doubt that I made much of a positive impact in their lives. To be fair, as substitute teachers, we have 1,000 things going on at once, and we're strangers. And many of those things do pluck on our strings of insecurity. If you saw the principal that morning and she didn't say hi, the secretary didn't even look up while she checked you in, and you barely got a polite nod from 2 out of the 7 teachers you passed in the hallway, then it's kind of hard to gear up and expect a class of 40 students you don't know to be better than those adults. I discovered or decided that in spite of my own insecurities or how I was going to be treated first, if I was going to be a difference maker, I was going to have to engage my students outside the norms of that power pyramid. Yes, I was the adult in the room. Yes, they should be ready to come in, sit down, and start working. Yes, in reality, what I was going to continue to hear was, hey, we have a sub today. Yes, Hector, we got a sub, yo. And this was code for, we don't have to work, and we're going to talk all period long. Instead of letting this bother me, I decided that I was going to begin at the beginning and use an introduction with every class I taught. I wrote it out, practiced it, I adapted it, memorized it, I nailed it to the point of it becoming second nature. I'm not using hyperbole when I say this practice made all the difference for setting the tone in my teaching. There were no roses thrown toward me as I concluded my 60 to 90 second interlude, but there wasn't a frazzled shusher in the room either. And even if a class didn't respond to it like I had hoped, which was rare, it still positively affected how I taught that class. I did my best work starting with that introduction. I could live with that. I could use that as a jumping off point to roam the classroom, meet students who wanted to work, and be the professional, caring adult I was being paid to be. Ultimately, I realized introductions were a part of rapport building, and classroom management without rapport building is no classroom management at all. If you're willing to give introductions a try, even if you know they may not go well right away, it's important to realize that some of the essential elements that an engaging introduction will need, you are already doing. Making a positive difference in the life of students isn't about control or how quiet you can make the class become. It's about being comfortable enough in your own skin, flaws and all, to let students see that you're willing to do whatever it takes to make the most of the day because they matter. If you're not already using an introduction on days that you sub, or if you simply want to sharpen your skills, I want to give you 5 elements that I regularly include when meeting a new class. Here are 5 elements to include in your personal introduction. Number 1, ask for their attention as a visitor, not a dictator. I don't know about you, but at the middle school and especially the high school level, I get a little nervous as a class I've never met begins to settle in. I've learned to channel that nervous energy into confident humility. I've learned asking students if I can have their attention for about a minute, minute and a half in that vibe of confident humility, the students infer that I see myself as a guest and not someone who's coming in to lay down the law. I'm still in charge, but I'm immediately seen more as an advocate rather than an adversary. Number 2, let them know you have people who care about you. Without attempting to wade into the sociological principles behind it, simple or complex, the fact is that all of our major social media platforms give follower counts top billing. It usually goes name, profile pic, profile descriptor, and then straight to the number of others that person is following or being followed by. Twitter elevates this with blue check marks as if to say, you should really pay attention to this person. I found that almost every time I mentioned my family, a colleague I knew at that school, or even a class from another school, the kids listening to me made the connection that I had value to someone. Therefore, I might also have something to add to their day. Students are absolutely starved for quality community, and there is something special working in our favor when they hear we value it too. Number 3, mention how education is an important part of your makeup as a person. You are all in a classroom, in a school, and part of a school district. Society thinks it's important enough that you're getting paid and others are paying for them to be there for free. Money has been spent for everything from the buses that got them there, to the lunch being prepared, to the technology being used, and hopefully the air conditioning buzzing in the background. Basically, money, lots and lots of money, has been spent for them to learn. Students should hear that the people entrusted to teach them have placed value on their own learning as well. I've subbed while working on my master's degree, and then again while working on my teaching credential. I had great success engaging students simply by telling them I had a paper due by the end of the week. The emphatic groaning of, "Oh, we hear you, man," was always a good sound. And even if I wasn't in school, mentioning that I achieved my bachelor's or master's was the kind of positive seeds about academics I wanted to plant. Number 4, give some transparent insight into your humanity. Anything that is appropriate and interesting about your life outside the classroom will be picked up by the high-pitched hearing of students. I have to stress the word appropriate. Stay absolutely professional in your words and actions, but go ahead and mention your concern for your new puppy at home alone, or your kid's talent show tonight. Your grandma's 85th birthday is that weekend? Great. Kids have grandmas they love too. I'm not talking about being manipulative or putting on a self-deprecating comedy routine, but sharing some of what makes you human is one of the most disarming things you can do in a classroom. In doing so, you've just communicated to them that you aren't there to be the toughest, meanest, most controlling sub that ever lived, and a sense of gladness and peace will absolutely flood the place, whether you see it or not. And element number 5, absolutely exude high levels of respect for them as students and as people. For this point, I would say there are two A and B subpoints that should always be adhered to. A, never let students not looking your way bother you. Don't demean them, don't shine a light on them, don't wait until all 37 pencils are down and then create awkward silence by staring at number 38. I'm not saying try not to embarrass them, I'm saying don't do it because no one benefits. And B, talk to the ones that are listening like they matter. If you can make eye contact, do it. Scan the room, smile, look like you want to be there. Up to this point, whatever you've chosen to do to humbly get their attention, to let them know people care about you, to mention the importance of education, and to give some transparent insight into you as a person, be encouraged that it's working for some, if not all. From here, you should expect good things to happen the rest of your time together, even if that only means the absence of bad things. I hope by now, either through experience or maybe from this podcast, you realize you don't have to be like that substitute teacher in the tweet trying to shush the class into giving you their attention. Getting a class to settle down is challenging, but not impossible. You are a person with a life, a story, and a job to do. Starting off by letting them know that will help you to be effective for the rest of your time together. And remember, you're not alone. It took me a long time to go from being a shusher to someone who could stand quietly and listen as the commotion faded into silence. Practice, 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 and be encouraged. Tell me your opinion. Have you made it a practice of introducing yourself to classes? Did you work on perfecting a sort of scripted introduction, or are you comfortable winging it? What helped you engage students during your introduction? If you'd like to contribute to the conversation on this subject, be sure to stop by the website, canyouSubAgain.com. You can always find a transcript of the most recent podcast and add your voice to the discussion by visiting the post on the topic or on the site's homepage. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, and if you'd like to support Can You Sub Again, I would totally appreciate it if you'd consider taking the time to leave a quick rating or review on the Apple site. Thanks so much for listening to the Can You Sub Again podcast, and be sure to check back again next week.